Clear
Classified.
the chamber. Stay alert.
Top secret Soviet military
Watch out.
research division project. Prolonged wakefulness study date, December 1947. Location research facility, Siberia. The 5 subjects were placed in a sealed chamber, equipped with observation windows, basic furnishings, running water, and enough dried food to last 30 days. The chamber was equipped with microphones to monitor conversations and speakers to allow communication with researchers. Compound 7 was introduced into the chamber's atmosphere at a concentration calculated to prevent sleep while maintaining basic cognitive function. Initial effects were promising. Subjects remained alert and coherent, showing no immediate adverse reactions to the gas. For the first 5 days, subjects behaved normally. They talked among themselves, exercised, read books provided by researchers, and cooperated with basic requests for information about their mental and physical state. Subject conversations were recorded and transcribed. Topics included speculation about their release, discussions of life before imprisonment, and plans for the future. All subjects expressed cautious optimism about the experiment's outcome. On the 6th day, researchers noted the first signs of psychological stress. Subjects began speaking less frequently to each other, and more often to the observation cameras, apparently convinced that researchers were watching them constantly. Subject in 3 became fixated on the idea that the experiment was a test of loyalty rather than endurance. He began spending hours staring directly into the observation cameras, occasionally making patriotic speeches about the glory of the Soviet Union. Subject in 5 developed an obsession with the chamber's ventilation system. He convinced himself that the gas was slowly poisoning them and began attempting to block air vents with torn clothing and food scraps. By day 8, paranoia had set in among all subjects. They stopped talking to each other entirely and began exhibiting signs of auditory hallucinations, responding to voices that were not present and asking researchers to make them stop talking. The 2nd week marked the beginning of severe physical symptoms. All subjects showed visible weight loss, trembling, and pale, waxy skin. Their eyes became sunken and bloodshot, with pupils dilated despite constant lighting in the chamber. Subject 2 began compulsively tearing pages from books and eating them. When researchers asked why, he explained that the words were crawling around and he needed to digest the information properly. Subject 4 started engaging in self-harm behaviors, scratching at his arms until they bled. He told researchers that there were things under the skin that needed to be removed. Despite the injuries, he showed no signs of pain and continued the behavior even when his arms became severely lacerated. Most disturbing was Subject 1, who had begun speaking to the walls in what sounded like an unknown language. When researchers asked him to explain, he claimed he was translating for them, but would not elaborate on who they were. All subjects refused to sleep, despite showing extreme exhaustion. When researchers offered to turn off the gas and allow them to rest, the subjects became agitated and begged for the experiment to continue. By day 13, all pretense of normal human behavior had disappeared. The subjects had stopped eating the provided food and were consuming their own hair, fingernails, and in some cases their own flesh. Subject N3 had peeled off most of the skin from his lower legs and was attempting to fashion some kind of rope from it. When researchers demanded an explanation, he said he was making preparations for the arrival. Subject N5 had gouged out his own eyes with his fingernails. Remarkably, he showed no pain response and continued to move around the chamber as if he could see perfectly. He spoke constantly to empty areas of the room, having detailed conversations with entities that were apparently invisible to observers. The most horrific transformation occurred with Subject 2. He had begun consuming his own body systematically, starting with his fingers. Despite losing significant amounts of blood and tissue, he remained active and alert. The wounds showed no signs of infection and seemed to be healing at an unnaturally rapid rate. On day 15, researchers made the decision to terminate the experiment early. The subjects had become something that could no longer be classified as human. When researchers announced that the experiment was ending and that they would be entering the chamber, the subjects' response was unexpected and violent. All 5 subjects, despite their various injuries and mutilations, moved with inhuman speed and coordination to block the chamber door. They had somehow acquired superhuman strength and were able to resist multiple armed guards. Subject Dun 1, who had been relatively passive throughout the experiment, spoke for the group. "We will not sleep. We will not leave. This is what you wanted. This is what we have become. We are awake. We are finally awake." The subjects fought with desperate intensity to prevent the chamber from being opened. When soldiers finally breached the door, they found a scene that defied medical explanation. The chamber was covered in blood and tissue, but all 5 subjects were still alive. Their wounds, which should have been fatal, had partially healed. They moved with jerky, unnatural motions and showed no response to pain or injury. Most disturbing was their appearance. While still recognizably human, they had developed characteristics that suggested something else entirely. Their teeth had grown longer and sharper. Their fingernails had become claw-like. Their eyes, when they still had them, reflected light like those of nocturnal animals. When soldiers attempted to remove the subjects from the chamber, they fought with inhuman ferocity. Subject 4, despite having torn most of the muscle from his arms, was still able to overpower 2 armed guards. The subjects repeatedly screamed that they would not sleep, that they could not sleep, that sleep was the enemy of consciousness. They begged to be allowed to remain in the chamber with the gas. Dr. Redacted, the lead researcher, made the decision to sedate the subjects for medical evaluation. However, when anesthetic was administered, the subject's vital signs immediately began failing. Subject 5 died within minutes of sedation. His final words, according to witnesses, were, "I must not sleep. I must not dream. They are waiting in the dreams." As each subject was sedated, they died. It became clear that whatever they had become, they could no longer survive without the constant stimulation of the gas. You fools. You think we are the monsters, but we are what you become when you refuse to face the darkness. We are what remains when humanity is stripped away. We are awake, and we have seen what sleeps inside all of you. We are not the experiment. We are the result. And the result is that there are things worse than death, worse than madness. There are things that wait in the space between sleeping and waking, and we have become their servant. You have opened a door that should have remained closed. You have awakened something that should have stayed sleeping, and now it knows you exist. He died moments after the sedative took effect. The experiment was immediately classified at the highest levels of Soviet military intelligence. All researchers and personnel involved were transferred to other projects or eliminated to prevent information leaks. The chamber was sealed and the facility was designated as a contaminated zone. According to classified records, the building was eventually demolished, and the site was designated as a permanent exclusion zone. In his words, "Sleep protects us from ourselves. Dreams are the mind's way of processing the darkness that exists within human consciousness. When we prevent sleep, we force the mind to confront that darkness directly, without the buffer of unconsciousness." The subjects did not become monsters. They became human beings, stripped of the illusions that make civilization possible. The compound used in the experiment was destroyed, and all research into sleep deprivation was suspended indefinitely. However, classified documents suggest that similar experiments may have been conducted by other governments during the Cold War period, found among Dr. Redacted's personal effects after his death in 1952. I have not slept properly since the experiment ended. When I close my eyes, I see them, not as they were at the end, but as they became. They were right about one thing. We are all monsters. We just use sleep to forget it. The subject spoke of them, entities that exist in the space between consciousness and unconsciousness. I believe they were referring to aspects of human nature that civilization has taught us to suppress. Sleep allows us to process and contain these impulses safely. Without sleep, without dreams, without the protective barrier of unconsciousness, we are forced to confront the full spectrum of human potential. This includes capacities for violence, survival, and adaptation that most of us never access. The experiment did not create monsters, it revealed them, and if Dr. Petrov's theories are correct, similar results could be replicated under the right conditions. I pray that no one is ever foolish enough to try. The Russian sleep experiment remains one of the most classified and controversial studies of the Soviet era. While official records claim the experiment never occurred, declassified documents and witness testimony suggest that research into consciousness manipulation continued throughout the Cold War. Similar incidents have been reported in connection with military research programs in multiple countries, but none have been officially confirmed. The ethical implications of such experiments led to the development of international protocols governing human research subjects. However, questions remain about the nature of consciousness, the purpose of sleep, and what happens to human beings when they are pushed beyond their biological limits. The subject's claims about entities existing in the space between sleep and consciousness have never been adequately explained by conventional psychology or neuroscience. Modern sleep researchers acknowledge that prolonged sleep deprivation can produce hallucinations, paranoia, and violent behavior. However, the physical transformations described in the Soviet experiment remain medically impossible according to current scientific understanding. The truth about what happened in that Siberian facility may never be fully known, but the experiment serves as a reminder of the dangers of unchecked government power and the ethical boundaries that must exist in scientific research. It also raises disturbing questions about human nature and what we might discover if we were forced to confront ourselves without the protective barrier of sleep and dreams. Some knowledge, perhaps, is too dangerous to pursue. Some doors are meant to remain closed, and some experiments should never be conducted, regardless of what they might reveal about the nature of human consciousness.